do you deal with difficult people, Paul? I mean, you've been in public life for an extended period of time. You've been a lawyer. You've had to deal with difficult cases, both commercial and non-commercial. You're a businessman, a successful one. You've been a professor. What's the recipe from your perspective in trying to deal with difficult people?
Humor. My mom used to always say, you get more flies with honey than vinegar. You've heard that old country expression. And you know, your natural reaction to people when they're irritating you, and you and I have seen a lot of people on the doorstep or in a kitchen table or in a church basement when we've been in politics, and there's always one person that wants to be a bit of a contrarian. And that's the great thing about politics, or the great thing about business. There's always going to be somebody that has an opposite or a contrary perspective. So I think you just be friendly and kind and direct. But also, humor has helped me through very many difficult cases, and I can think of dozens of times where I'm in a room with, you know, somebody that's really not very happy about their own life. And I always in my head think, gee, I wonder what's really going on at home. You know, what really happened with that person that has made them that unhappy that they have to make everybody else in this room feel feel angry, or they're expressing their anger. And I think of one case where I recently was in a negotiation, and there was about a dozen people on the other side, and one of the parties in the room was a lawyer, and it didn't matter what we were talking about. Everything that his entire team talked about, he said no to, and continued to say no. And so I looked at it and I thought through it very carefully, and there was the first half hour went and the 45 minutes went, and then there was a little break. And I went to get a coffee, and there were the little muffins and some croissants. And I took a croissant and I put it at his desk. And I looked at him and I said, you look like you need a little bit of something in your stomach, because you seem a little bit grumpy today. And everybody else, his whole team laughed. And he was grumpy, there was no question about it. But all of a sudden, what happened is I changed the pattern of the negotiation immediately, just with a little humor, because what happened is that his own team knew that he was being a bit of a contrarian. And some of his points, by the way, were valid, and we were trying to figure out how we would get over the legal challenges that he was raising. But that little move where I took a little croissant and put it on his desk changed the dynamic of the room with humor, and you know, we didn't become friends, but it lowered the volume, if you will, in the room.
Has humor worked in other kinds of deals that you've been involved with over the years?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think humor, but appropriate humor, not, you know, sort of like not bathroom humor, but humor of just letting everyone realize that, you know what, nobody died here. There's a negotiation. We're all trying to work to a positive result. Let's try to give the benefit of the doubt to everyone. You know, everybody wants to be a winner. The other thing that I find is when you're negotiating, there's got to be a sense of ethic and honor to what you're talking about. You know, if you want to have a long relationship with people, I mean, you and I have known each other for 35 years, 40 years. You are direct and positive, but you also have to be honest and honorable in your dealings with people, because at the end of the day, all you have is your name, and your dad and my dad taught me the same thing. You have your name and the ethic and honor that goes with what you as a person, as an individual, represent. You may be in an organization that is a little less ethical or a little less honorable, but you as an individual need to take pride in what you do and how you represent yourself. And if you do that in a forthright, honest, and transparent way, you'll always be successful.
That's a very, very, very good insight in terms of being honorable, particularly if you're a young person starting out in your career, because you can build on that foundation. And as you know, reputations can be changed in a nanosecond.
That's right.
You know, if in fact you're not honorable in going forward. But coming back to difficult people, Have you had to caucus with members of your negotiating team to say to one of your fellow colleagues, cool it, cool it, cool it?
Yeah, I mean, you know the expression, there's always the good guy and the bad guy in the room, or good cop, bad cop. You know, you can choose one of those analogies. We would often, and I think of some of the series of negotiations where I'm in representing our client or our customer in a deeper negotiation where there are millions of dollars at play. I'll say, who's going to be the good guy as we go into the room? And sometimes we all forget our roles. And I can think of one particular, in the same deal, where we had all agreed, this had been going on, it was midsummer and it was Toronto, and it was like a Thursday afternoon, and everyone was sort of looking that it was going to be a nice weekend, and we decided that there was going to be no Friday meeting, so that everybody could go off to the cottage on Thursday. And I don't know, I guess one of us inadvertently said, well, what about a meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock? And the other team, and all of a sudden there was let's have a timeout, Paul. We need to have a meeting. We need to re-caucus amongst ourselves. And I went back into our office and they said, hey, I thought we were going to take the weekend off here. And I said, oh yeah, I forgot. Tomorrow's Friday. So, you know, you sometimes even forget what you all agreed. And it's, why are you being so rude today in this meeting? You know, that's my job. I'm to be the tough guy. So, you know, sometimes you forget yourself in the flight of negotiations. But I think that also speaks to knowing the people that are on your team and knowing their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, we all can't be good at everything.
Tell me about time frame. Cisco is embarking upon selling some of its products and its technological services to company XYZ. Mm-hmm. Do you have an approach where, look, we want to get this deal done within 60 days or 90 days? Do you share that with the other party? What happens when you're getting close to that time frame and you're nowhere near a deal? Where does the time come in terms of negotiating the deal?
Well, time sometimes can be price sensitive. So what you might say to the party on the other side is, look, I can offer this price because this product is on an assembly line and it's offered at a certain price with a certain price discount associated with it. But after a certain date, we can't honor that price. So sometimes price can help, you know, nudge a negotiation. So that's one factor. Another factor in negotiation is delivery. Very often, particularly in technology, delivery, you know, there may be a system that's being implemented. And it's the integration of the system will take a 2-year delivery lapse. And as I said to you earlier, sometimes technology can change so quickly. You've bought a car and you need the power windows because, you know, the old technology didn't have it. It was the roll window. Now, you know, that's an example. So what that sometimes becomes a factor is the delivery factor. The other thing that I often find when you're dealing with technology is everybody in the room understands what it is, but because it's technical, but then when it goes up one more layer into the business organization, nobody in the business understands it. So the analogy I've often used is, well, the businessman or the businesswoman that's buying the technology, all they think about is that they want a dozen eggs. They just want to buy a dozen eggs. Whereas the tech people think, well, do you know how eggs are made? Do you understand the engineering behind the eggs? You need chickens, you need hens, and you need, you know, the growth cycle of the egg. So, you know, those are factors that get very complicated. So it depends on what layer you're negotiating with, whether the layer is at the business or the layer is at the technology, and price and time are two of the big factors.
Now, in terms of pursuing a particular sale and you're attempting to negotiate with that company, and because you are in such a an evolving sector. Well, I don't think it's evolving, it's changing rapidly, the technology. So time would become quite crucial in terms of any agreement you would make with potential clients. Am I correct in that?
Right, and so master agreements become critical. So
explain that, master agreement.
well, a master agreement may say you and I are partners, and there are certain principles that are governing our relationship, but that, for example, because of the changing of technology, let's just pick security, for example. So 3 weeks ago, we all saw the tragic events that occurred on Parliament Hill. And all of a sudden, you thought this building representing the symbol of democracy was impenetrable, and all of a sudden it became quite fragile overnight. I, by coincidence, was with one of the heads of the largest hydro organization in North America at the time, and the moment that the shots were fired in Ottawa, his technology people immediately had his whole networks were on high alert as a result of activities that were going on in an unrelated city, in an unrelated jurisdiction, not connected at all in the same, you would think supply of power, how could that possibly be connected? But because of the threat, a security threat, and the inferences of that, you can imagine all of a sudden everyone's now thinking about that as a new, as another threat. And in a master agreement, you have two partners that are related to each other by virtue of the fact that they're doing business. And then one of the partners says, well, you know what? Security has become, it may have been the number 5 on my list. It's now back at number 1. So all of the things that you were doing that were, just dealing with our data or making sure we had secure networks, we're worried about security as a principle.
What is the norm for your master agreement? Say, for instance, I'm the CEO of company XYZ. You come in to sell me product and services. We would develop first what, a master agreement?
It depends. I mean, it depends. We have different relationships. We might have a memorandum of understanding. That might be something that we have. It could be a master agreement. It could be a sales related. There's a buffet of documents that might codify the relationships between the two organizations. But everything is always customized to the customer. It's what does the customer want? What do they need in their organization? Because very often these are public companies. They may have a standard set of forms, but as you would guess, everything's now done by click and accept electronically. So, for example, Cisco itself, as an organization, uses technology for almost everything that they do. Here's an example of a change in technology. Cisco would fly to meetings as individuals, you would fly all over the country for meetings or all over the world for meetings. Because of technology, of our video connection, it's called our telepresence suite of offerings, you can actually work from home. You can work with your device. You can work connected to any group of meetings where you have a series of people that are all being connected. So whether it's on the government side, where the government actually decides they want to purchase this, so it could be G7 finance ministers or G8 or a G20 group of defense ministers that are meeting. They want secure, real, in-time, digital, private connections. That's what we sell. But you could be a bank president who wants that as a technology to sell. So all of this is constantly changing.
That's a fascinating sector that you're involved with. Just getting back to master agreements, memorandums of understanding, what's the norm in terms of term that you might have with a potential client?
Well, oftentimes what we found is whether it's with a government or whether it's with a bank, they're now looking to leave the term an unending term. In other words, it's just a relationship, because there are multi vendors, and because technology is changing so often, you will very often find that our customers, whether it's a public sector customer or it's a private sector customer, the year is left off, or it's automatically a rollover. So it could be year to year.
And it doesn't preclude them from going somewhere else,
right,
if there's a new mousetrap, which is much better,
right,
much more effective.
Absolutely. And that also adds another layer of competition within the environment. So as a workforce, our sales engineers are on the job all the time. It adds another level of complexity, but another level of competitiveness. So that's why education becomes so critical, and continuing education. You'll see in our office almost every day a tutorial going on with some new hook or widget that, as you say, a mousetrap, that a better way of doing something that is constantly being offered as a suite of ideas for our sales organization.
Would you say that Paul Zed has to be a patient guy in dealing with potential clients that are interested in the Cisco suite of services and products, but for financial reasons, other reasons, are just not ready to sign on the dotted line?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm, in my younger days, I was obviously it was ready, fire, aim. I wanted to get moving quickly. And some of it comes from your youth. But one of the things that I emphasize with everybody is, going back to what we talked about earlier, relationships. You don't know when you bump into that person in the elevator, whether they're the CEO or whether they're the purchasing agent or a purchasing arm or part of an organization. So treating people well, regardless of their background and regardless of where they are, becomes critical, because in the future, you don't know where that seeds itself into something that will ultimately be an important part of the future for your success. And patience is a virtue, as the old expression goes, and it's a virtue that I teach my own 5 children every day. Be patient. Slow and steady wins the race.
Tell me, in terms of closing a particular arrangement with a client, is there any strategies or principles that you and your team follow in terms of the closing technique? Is it an invitation to close, or I believe we now have an agreement? Could you give us some thought to that?
Some of this comes from my old days of having been in politics, and I will tell you this. I always think of, well, what does the ribbon cutting look like? What does that ceremony look like? And what are the winning principles of what gets announced? And so the analogy that I often tell my own team is, so at the end of the day, what's the discount that we want? What's the profit that we need? And what is the end game that we want to achieve? And I do that almost at every negotiation at the very front end, rather than, having it morph along. I always say, well, what does success look like? And so before the meeting starts, I just left a meeting this morning where this meeting has taken about, to your point about patience, it's taken about 2.5 years to arrange to get 2 very senior CEOs in a room together. We finally get them in the room together. And now it may take another year to get the deal that I need to put together. But I know, when we started this journey 3 years ago, I know what I think success will look like, and our whole team does. So patience is critical, but knowing in advance what the elements of success are going to be. And it isn't just cost. In other words, it isn't just the pursuit of the almighty dollar. Its success is also found in being able to replicate it, especially in an industry like ours, where you say, well, if I'm successful doing this in the city of Toronto, this will also work in Winnipeg, it'll also work in Vancouver, it'll also work in Halifax. And I know that in a lot of the technology field, directly in the technology field related business, you'll find that people are demoing things. In politics, you and I used to call it pilot projects because we couldn't just announce a project for the whole country. We would have to see, would this work in Sault Ste. Marie? Is it going to work in Sudbury, or is it going to work in Sydney, Nova Scotia?
Two final questions. I guess the second question is, share with us the sales training that takes place at Cisco. Because most of your people, if I'm correct, highly educated, very advanced in terms of technology and the advancement of technology and innovation. But what sort of sales training would they have in terms of trying to convince another party that their product and service is the best?
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that. I think our company probably spends more of its energy, effort, and time on understanding what the product is and what the product can do and where it can take you, as opposed to relationships. So, you know, I think that in a place where I believe we probably could do better, and it's not just at Cisco, it's the entire technology world. It comes from information is power, where knowing that, you know, this particular application or this particular networking device or this switch can do the following things, and it can connect, and it becomes a very technical conversation. And many of the people, in fact, most of the people that are in our sales organizations need to understand the technical conversation, because in the history of the company, those conversations only ever occurred with technical people. So the change that's now going on, I believe, in our industry is adding other skills, adding the importance of relationships, adding the importance of looking people in the eye and shaking hands and the basics of human decency. And I think that's probably where the company needs to get better at, is to understand that it's all about people, not necessarily only about product and service.
Yeah, I would think that the technical aspect of your services and your products is a major part of the sale, but it's not the complete aspect of the sale. You need the softer skills as well, particularly in the world that we live in now.
Yes, but interestingly, what I have found is that IT is in that information technology world. There's almost a neutrality of personality, and it's always about, you don't never even necessarily have to like the person. They just like the product. Whereas if you were in another industry, like buying an insurance policy, as an example, you tend to trust somebody. You look at them and you think, well, I'll buy something from that guy or gal. Whereas in the technology business, it's, I just want their product. So but because the product offerings are changing so often, I think relationships are going to become more important in this industry, and I think that's a trend that I would be watching for.
Final question. What advice, having all the experiences that you've had with public life, an educator, you're a well-educated man, businessman, you've traveled extensively, what advice would you give to students at Ryerson University, or indeed any university, who are trying to either get a first job or get a part-time job, or to get into the workforce and have an interesting career and move on in their lives? What are some of the things that you would advise them?
Well, you know, you got to like what you do. And the advice I would offer is the same advice that I offer my own kids, is you get up, you contribute to society, you be a good citizen of the world first. And I think that, you know, whether it's, you know, a volunteer, a lot of it is about giving back into your community. So whether it's your community is a church group or a United Way or Boy Scouts or your choir at the end of the street, a food bank, I think that the richness of giving back into the community, wherever your community is critical. The other thing is, I go back to humor. You have to like what you're doing. You have to have an energy about investing your time and your patience in being involved in a project or in your career. And you know, I think if when you and I were growing up, the great equalizer was television. Television made you start to understand that, you know, something was going on in Florida or Vancouver, the country became equalized as citizens. The internet has changed that very dramatically. And, you know, our kids are constantly on their iPhones, they're constantly messaging, and they're very often not even looking at you. And I think that you need to go back to some of the basics of putting the iPhone away, putting the BlackBerry away, and having these kind of direct dialogues with individuals. Maybe that will serve a long distance to getting to developing your skills, your interpersonal skills, because I think that we need to learn, almost relearn talking to each other. So I often will say to my kids, no Blackberries in the kitchen at dinner. And you know,
Wow.
you know, but you know, because we're so connected as a society. You know, as we were just walking into the studio, I saw two kids they were almost bumping into each other. And in California, they have bylaws on the street now. You're not allowed to walk and use your BlackBerry or your iPhone at the same time. People are actually, it's becoming a public safety hazard. So it'll be interesting, but I think we need to get our eyes off of the screen and looking back at each other.
Well, that's very good advice. On behalf of the students and the faculty at the Ted Rogers School of Management, I want to express our appreciation to you for,
Great pleasure to be
for
here.
joining us and for your many insights into the negotiating process. And I think we've all learned a great deal about Cisco Systems Canada. And I want to congratulate you on your efforts there and continued success.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.